If you're anything like me, your TikTok has been full of videos like this. And have been bringing those vibes along, and that little song has been stuck in your head, and you have just been like, I want to live and breathe this experience for much longer than a little TikTok video. So I decided to compile some books that I have read that I feel like fit those vibes for me, and books that I want to read that also I would anticipate those vibes being similar to. So here are my retro dark fantasy book recommendations. Now, I will do a disclaimer that dark fantasy is a legitimate subgenre of fantasy. It's usually a type of fantasy novel that has very dark or horrific elements to it. Now, I will be honest, I don't want this to be a video essay on all of the subgenres of fantasy. I'm kind of running on vibes right now. I'm running on high fantasy vibes. I'm running on doom and gloom is kind of looming in the distance. Like, we're kind of like, who are we rooting for? Who's gonna win, good versus evil type of vibe. Definitely emphasis on the retro vibes though. I feel like that's kind of what makes the whole like TikTok trend, is that it feels like, I don't know, like an 80s type of gritty cartoon or something. When you think of like The Hobbit, or when you think of The Secret of Nim, or when you think of The Black Cauldron, or just kind of like that kind of doom and gloom type of vibe, that's what we're going for. So don't come at me if you see something that wouldn't be a traditional dark fantasy book, because we're going on vibes. So the first book that I feel like matches those vibes perfectly is A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula Le Guin. This is a fantasy novel about the life of a wizard named Jed, his time becoming a wizard and fighting his arch nemesis, the Shadow. We follow him from the time that he's a young boy. He goes to wizarding school, and then he grows up to confront, well, multiple foes, but ultimately the Shadow. Honestly, I feel like the vibes of this book are kind of like a rock opera or something. Like if Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath, before Ozzy left, like wound up writing a whole rock opera or something about, you know, a young wizard fighting dragons and like trudging up mystical mountains. And yeah, I just think it's a very good read. Ursula Le Guin is very straightforward, very concise, but not in a rigid way that takes away any of the magic or any of the fun or any of the ambiance, really. I feel like it's very skilled to do that. I mean, you see the thickness of this book. Like, I think if you like fantasy, if you want those retro vibes, and if you want that looming, oh my gosh, what's going to happen at the end? Is he going to win or not type of feeling? Then I suggest it. And if you're kind of new to fantasy or like high fantasy itself, I feel like this is one of those classics that you kind of need to have on your shelf. Now, I feel like everyone says this, that they don't hear other booktubers or other people talk about these books. I have never heard anybody talk about this book ever, and I hadn't heard about it until I picked it up from a used bookstore when I was living in Atlanta. And it is called The Copper Crown by Patricia Keneally. I'm gonna call her Keneally. I mean, I know it's like a beat up copy, but the like, come on, this cover I feel like speaks to the retro fantasy tone that we're going for. This book is about elves in space. Now, literally imagine the first Alien movie, like their ship, instead of going to find Alien, the namesake of the movie, imagine they instead happen upon a giant spaceship or a giant meteoroid, I can't remember which, that just so happens to be an empire of elves, but like Tolkien style elves. Yeah, like they just meet Legolas the first time they land. So in this book, we follow the mistress of high magic and queen of all the Celts, because they live on Keltia and it's spelled with a K. So she's the main empress or whatever, and she is kind of at this truce with two other elven empires on the planet, and she's just kind of trying to keep the peace. She's dealing with these new humans who just landed on her planet, and there is kind of a turn, or a not mutiny, but a betrayal that happens that she has to deal with. I feel like there was a nice little mix of political intrigue. There's like a dose of romance in there. I think that there's betrayal. I think that the cast of characters is diverse enough, and have enough mix of personalities enough that it keeps it interesting, and you're actually genuinely curious about who each and every person is. I think that there's, if you like action and battle, that's in there. I don't think it's as dark in terms of horror as the other books that I've mentioned are. There's definitely a little dose of good versus evil. Not classic, like the evil villain is dressed in all black and has nothing but fire and brimstone on their mind, and more of the villain is a little sly, and our heroine doesn't exactly see it coming until she does, type of thing. So I highly recommend it. And also, if you just want to be like different, you know, then I recommend this book. I feel like, genuinely, I've never heard anybody talk about it, and it reads so well to me. It's just like, yeah, I love this. You know, you love a good book that has like a map in the cover. She literally goes in on what the pronunciation of these words are supposed to be, how to pronounce these names. Like, ugh, yes, I want to reread this, and I want to hunt down the other two books. So I recommend it. Now, this next book that I am going to recommend, I think is pretty popular. I have only read halfway through the first book, and I can already tell that it's probably going to be, like, genuinely is probably going to be my favorite series of all time, fantasy series of all time. And it is the Wheel of Time series, and featuring the first book, The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. This is a 14 or 15 book series. Each book is pretty chonky. I have only, like I said, finished half of this book. It's the first book in an epic fantasy series that follows a group of like small town friends, and they take this journey to take down the forces of evil. Now that was so general. It's a classic hero's journey, like full of good, evil, kind of like the hero didn't choose to be a hero, but just fell into it. He's got his merry band of friends. Now this first book in the series, I think, pulls very heavily from Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. Apparently that was kind of like a good way for Robert Jordan, the author, to get a good foot in the door in what was a pretty difficult time to become a new fantasy author. And apparently the second book onward is like his own thing. I loved the vibes of this, or at least the parts that I've read already. And even just when these books were starting to come out, like, I don't know, I'd consider that teetering on the edge of retro. I think that you definitely got the fantasy vibes checked off. In terms of dark, I do think that this book and Robert Jordan does a really good job of dealing with concepts of good and evil. And the evil is very purely evil. The evil is actively trying to tackle the good. I do think there are dark elements in it. I feel like the main evil person, almost like, I don't remember how to pronounce his name, but it's damn near Beelzebub. It's almost like the villain is like, what's his face from Nightmare on Elm Street? And I don't know why I can't remember his name, but yeah, I think it's a good book. I think that if you really want to be enthralled, if you want to be in reading for a little while, it's for you, for sure. The next book that I'm going to recommend, I feel like is pure fall and autumn vibes, but obviously retro dark fantasy vibes, and that is Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury. This story follows two schoolboys who grow up in a small town in Illinois, and the evil possessed carnival that comes to town and changes everyone around them. It definitely has the retro vibes. I feel like Bradbury wrote this in like the 50s or 60s, and this was based on his childhood, or experience he had growing up in a small town. So think 40s, 50s, middle America. Dark AF in terms of basically imagine like a carnival run by the devil. Like that is just the vibe itself. In terms of like this list, it definitely hits the retro dark fantasy for me. Fantasy, not in terms of high fantasy where, you know, nice and shiny armor, medieval princesses in distress type of vibe, but there's definitely elements of magic. This is very fantastical. I don't think I would consider this magical realism at all. And it's very haunted. I think it's a really good Halloween book. But I also think you could read this any time of the year, and get those retro dark fantasy vibes that we're talking about. So this next book, I'd actually be kind of surprised if you had never heard of it. I'd be surprised if you hadn't attempted to read it at some point in your life. But it is The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien, the first book in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I also love this cover. This was my mom's when she was in high school, so I love a good retro cover. I feel like this cover alone matches the vibes. So once again, I would be surprised if you have never heard of The Lord of the Rings. However, this follows a hobbit named Frodo who finds himself having to carry one of the most powerful, magical, oldest rings of the entire planet or world or realm of Middle Earth. Frodo is tasked with carrying this ring to the one place where it can be destroyed, which is Mount Doom or Mordor. The person who grants him with this task is Gandalf the Grey, or Gandalf, which is a wizard that has been a part of this world for a really long time as well. It's really important because Frodo is a hobbit, and hobbits are very peaceful, unsuspecting, non-adventurous folk, but yet he goes on this very not peaceful adventure through Middle Earth to destroy the purest of evil in the world. Definitely retro, definitely dark fantasy in my definition. Once again, this is not a video essay on what is dark fantasy and what should and should not be in that actual literary category. We're talking about vibes. I definitely will make the argument that it is dark fantasy though, if we're actually going on the literary genre, because I feel like, come on, like it's this little ring of evil trying to overcome the good that is hobbits and every other evil entity, race, force in that world is actively like trying to stop Frodo from his task, was weirdly attracted to this ring, is wanting to end Middle Earth as we know it. However, also classic hero's journey in that Frodo didn't ask for this to happen. Frodo's friends didn't ask for this to happen. It fell in their lap and they're like, well, we don't want the world to end, so let's do it. And they have the purest of hearts, and it's their journey along the way. And I tried to read this when I was in high school and I just couldn't get through it. I feel like J.R.R. Tolkien writes as if like you had this like really, really like painfully intelligent friend. Like, you know, those folks that are like, man, if I ask you to dumb it down, like it will still probably be a little over my head. That's how he wrote to me. I haven't tried to read this book again as an adult. Maybe at the right time I could get through it, but for right now I'm just gonna binge watch the extended editions of the movies whenever they're on HBO or whatever. I do think that this is a really good book for folks who also want to have the like fantasy classics on their bookshelf. I do think the dark elements are apparent. I mean, that's the plot of the book. I think the vibes are there for you. However, I think you're just gonna have to see if you're well matched to Tolkien's writing style, and that's just a personal thing for me. The next book I'm gonna mention is my favorite book of all time, and that is Coraline by Neil Gaiman. I feel like I always would pronounce it Gaiman in my head, but I think it's pronounced Gaiman. It's pronounced Gaiman, I believe. Coraline's my favorite book of all time. I first read it when I was, I think, in middle school, and she was my shiro. Like, I was Team Coraline all day, every day, and I think it's my most reread book. Now, I will admit that it's not heavy on the retro vibes at all. It can be reimagined as though it could be a retro fantasy. Definitely dark, definitely fantasy. So, Coraline is about a little girl who moves into a new townhouse or like apartment or home basically with her two parents. Her parents are workaholics, don't really pay attention to her. Coraline finds the secret door that goes to an alternate universe where she has a different mom and dad, an other mother, and an other father. And everything seems really great and fun and dandy there. And then all of a sudden, I don't know, the tables start to turn a little bit. Other mother seems to be a bit more demanding and a bit more scary, and wants Coraline's soul for some reason. And Coraline's parents. So Coraline goes on a little adventure to save her parents, save herself, save other souls that the other mother has taken. I was hesitant to put it in this list because it just really doesn't emphasize the retro, but other books that I have in this list emphasize the retro but don't heavily emphasize the dark. Like, basically Coraline is low-key just like a fantasy horror for, well, aimed at like children. So it'd be hard to not put that in here. All right, so I have a couple of honorable mentions, and a lot of the honorable mentions on this list, I feel like are primarily books that I haven't read but I want to read, or I've started to read and didn't finish. Or they're books that I'm kind of like, we're going on vibes, right? And like, for some reason it just doesn't fit the vibe totally. Yeah. So the first honorable mention that I'm going to honorably mention is The Mists of Avalon. Now, this is another epic fantasy. I feel like the vibes are definitely on point. If you like Arthurian legends, this is for you. If you like female leads, this is for you. If you like books written by women, this is for you. I feel like I say this a lot about a lot of the books here, but the vibes are immaculate. This is a book that I didn't finish reading, but I started reading. When I started reading it, I could tell that I was going to get enthralled so much. It was going to suck me in, which is great. That's what you want in a book. And I made the mistake of Googling the author, and what I learned about the author just like kind of didn't really like sit totally well with me, I guess, and that impacted how eager I was to read it. I still own the book. I bought it from a used bookstore, so it's not like, I don't know. There's a lot of media that I consume that I know absolutely nothing about the creators, the folks that had anything to do with that piece of art being in my face at that point, and I love it. Judge the art by the art itself. This was just one of those times where I accidentally found out something that I kind of low-key wish I didn't find out, because I can tell that this book is amazing. Maybe don't look up the author like I did, or do, and make your own decision on whether to read it or not. Once again, I still own it. I'm probably gonna read it. I want to love it. I just need to like do some inner work or something before I do that. Another honorable mention I used to own, don't know where the copy is Tarzan of the Apes. Now, I liked this book because it actually kept my attention. I was pleasantly surprised. So it's not a lot like the Disney movie, so that's what helped me to continue reading it, because I didn't always know what was going to happen next. Lot less romance, and if you're anything like me, I don't mind romance being like a subplot of what I'm reading, but I'm not always into romance as like in your face. And let's be honest, Tarzan is a romance, the Disney movie rather. But the book is definitely retro, definitely dark, not fantasy in terms of a lot of magic though, but fantastical, maybe fictional more so though. I definitely feel like it is a product of its time. Like, it's not retro as in 80s, it is retro as in shit, when was it even? It's not retro as in 1980s retro, it is retro as in 1914, I think, is when it was written. And is definitely a product of his time in terms of how Edgar Rice Burroughs describes women, describes um, Africa. I don't know, like, so keep that in mind. But I definitely feel like it's got the kind of gritty, like, I don't know, haunted, adventurous feeling that maybe I feel like is tapped into when I see the like retro dark fantasy kind of like stuff circulating around. Another book that I'm adding to this list that I have never read before is Conan the Barbarian. I feel like it has similar vibes to Tarzan, probably more violent, probably more action than fantasy, more fiction than fantasy, but I think that it has magic in it. I don't know. Has anybody ever read that? I've never even watched the movie, so I'm like really going on vibes alone here. Like, we are really just like freeballing it. So, but I do want to read Conan the Barbarian or one of the books. I feel like that would definitely give me those vibes a little bit. A little bit. This next book in series is also one that I have genuinely never heard anyone ever talk about. It's called Elric of Melniboné by Michael Moorcock, which, let's all pause for that last name. Like, the series is about an albino king emperor who is like the last king of his island or of his peoples or something like that. And it's also kind of wild because I think that he's like a sickly king, but also very powerful. Like, he wields this sword called Shadowbringer or something like that. It's very much like, I don't know, He-Man, She-Ra vibes, I think. And I'm really curious about it because I've literally never had a lead character, one, be albino, and two, like as a character trait. Like, I just feel like, what? I've never experienced a lead fantasy character with such a like prominent disability, I'm guessing. And I'm saying I'm guessing only because in all the synopses I read, it turns out that Elric regularly needs medication. He was like sickly as a child. Even though he's like this big, powerful dude that like saves the world or something, like, he needed help, you know? I don't know. I feel like it's kind of cool. And also, just the concept alone just kind of makes me chuckle a little bit, and I'm pretty curious about it. Don't know how dark it is. I feel like just it being such a like sword fighting vibe, though, I feel like there's gotta be some final boss that is like causing havoc on the universe that he's a part of. So I'm putting it in here. So, another honorable mention I'm going to talk about is Dune by Frank Herbert. I didn't even know his name. Now, I feel like Dune is one of the, like, I haven't watched the movie, I haven't read this, obviously. I feel like it is in that weird Venn diagram of sci fi and fantasy. Like, it's probably in the middle somewhere. I feel like this is a book that people either love or hate. And whenever that happens, I tend to be on the hate it side. And I'm worried that I won't like Dune. I feel like there's so much hype around it. I feel like it's also a classic. I feel like it screams retro dark fantasy vibes to me. I definitely, I I don't know. I just don't feel convinced that I'm going to be in love with it. I'm also such a mood reader that, like, right now, at least at this day in time, I'm more wanting to read like stuff like this, and I'm not really wanting to touch anything that is too much of a thought experiment, I guess. I don't know. I don't really feel like reading sci fi. right now. I don't know. I feel like, can somebody convince me to read Dune? Like, tell me why I should read it. Please. I genuinely, like, I mean, I own it. Like, I feel like I should. I feel like I should read it. So that was definitely not an exhaustive list. But I had fun. I am really curious if any of y'all have read these books and you're like, why on earth is this even included? I want to know if you've read these books and you've been like, yeah, this is one of the stories that I thought of when I saw that TikTok trend. Let me know if there are also books that you would have included if you were to make a video like this, because I always love video recommendations. I need a longer TBR list, of course. So I'm excited to see what you all have to say. Thanks for hanging out with me. Bye.